All right, I think we're live. Cool. All right, so I'm super excited to have you guys here today and to talk about the autoimmune protocol and conventional medicine and kind of how those things can work together and we can find a balance, or we have worked hard to find a balance between the two. So let's see, just to start us off, if you guys want to introduce yourselves and tell a little bit about yourself, what autoimmune condition or conditions that you have, and where you blog, that would be good. Who wants to start us off? Angie, you want to start us?
Sure. I'm Angie Alt. I have celiac disease, endometriosis, and lichen sclerosis. And as of the new year, I blog with my amazing blog partner, Mickey Trescott, at Autoimmune Paleo.
Cool. Jaime?
I'm Jaime Hartman, and I blog at Gutsy By Nature. I have Crohn's disease, which I've had for now almost 20 years. Hard to believe, but I was diagnosed in 1995.
Cool. Tara?
And I am Tara Perillo with Paleo Cajun Lady. I have lupus, psoriasis, and vitiligo, and also endometriosis. And I received my lupus diagnosis at the end of 2013. So that one is pretty new for me.
Okay. And I am Samantha McClellan, and I blog over at Sweet Potatoes and Social Change. And I have ulcerative colitis that I was diagnosed with in 2011. So it's been a few years since that diagnosis. So to start us off, I kind of just want to tell everybody kind of the process that we've gone through in terms of what brought us to the autoimmune protocol, rather than solely relying on conventional medicine, and kind of work forward from there. So the first question is, what led you to try healing with diet and lifestyle changes rather than only following the conventional approach of prescriptions and or surgery? I don't know. Who wants to jump in there?
Do you just want to keep? Do you want us to keep going in the same order?
Sure.
Okay. Otherwise, we'll all just sit here. Who's gonna go?
Yeah.
Who's gonna go? Well, so I decided that I was gonna combine approaches, or that I was gonna use, some additional approaches to the conventional medical approach because of the length of my journey. It was really long. My first symptoms started in 2001, just shortly after my daughter was born, and I didn't get my last diagnosis until February of 2012. So it's like a really long process, and by the time I got my last diagnosis, which was celiac disease, I realized that a more holistic approach was necessary. It wasn't going to work to just rely on this one path with the doctors. So.
You want me to go next?
Yeah.
So, as I mentioned before, I was diagnosed in 1995. I was just 19 at the time, and I've been eating. So that's 20 years, and I've been eating paleo for 2 years. So, I think that I think my path is a little bit different. What led me to combine them was really not to combine them, but to try something different. I did 18 years of the conventional approach. I had multiple surgeries. I was on every medication you could think of, and ultimately kind of hit rock bottom. My main symptom that I was having serious problems with at the time was anemia, so bad that I was getting blood transfusions. And I was sitting in the chair getting my blood transfusion in January of 2013 or 2013, and it occurred to me that the only time that I had not had really severe anemia, or at least moderately severe anemia, was when I was between surgeries and I had to be completely nourished by an IV, so I wasn't eating anything. And so there was just something clicked all of a sudden, like food obviously had something to do with this. Something I was eating was causing this to get worse. So that led me to start doing some research, looking into, well, what kinds of diets are out there? What do people do? What is the science behind it? And I started with a specific carbohydrate diet, which is very much like paleo in that it's grain-free, but in other ways it's not. And then that work seemed to help a lot, I think mainly because it was gluten-free, now looking back in retrospect. But it wasn't until I went paleo and eliminated eating like a jar of peanut butter every week and a bunch of cheese that and then adding back in some starchy vegetables. I think that was another thing that I really needed, that I really started to get some healing and some health. So that's a little bit more than what you asked, but basically, why did I decide to combine? I don't think that I decided. It was more of a desperation. I needed to try to add something in addition to what I was doing.
Cool.
And I basically did it because I've been a practicing herbalist and homeopath for, 15 years now. So I knew I wasn't going to take a full-on allopathic medicine approach to things and conventional medicine. And I had to find a way to kind of balance it, knowing that I wasn't going to be taking the medication that they wanted to prescribe to me, and knowing that I wasn't going to want to follow their course of treatment necessarily. So I kind of came at it from a different perspective of like, okay, what can I do naturally and work together with them as much as I'm willing to do? And then I put it all together, and I am where I am now.
Cool. And I, like I said, I got diagnosed in 2011, and at the time that I was diagnosed, it was my last semester of college. I was 21. I ended up getting engaged 2 months later. Life moving really fast. I was just not in a place of being at all interested in making drastic lifestyle changes, and I just kind of wanted to be like, okay, yeah, that happened, and now I take some magic pill and everything is better. So I did just go ahead and follow what the doctor told me to do in the very beginning. So I did prednisone and I did mesalamines, and then I ended up on an immunosuppressant as well, and I did go into remission. I did, within the first couple of months of my diagnosis, go gluten-free. My sister had been gluten-free for a while already, so I was pretty familiar with that, and she had actually had some genetic testing done that had indicated that she had gluten sensitivity from both sides of our family, so I knew that I needed to not eat gluten anyway. So I did do that within a couple months of my diagnosis, but outside of that, I was just pretty happy doing what the doctors had told me. And I had also been basically sick for my entire life, so I didn't really know that I felt as bad as I did. And then actually in a conversation with some coworkers after I had graduated from college and things like that, we were talking about wedding diets, and the paleo diet came up. And I ended up researching it, and I was like, oh, well, it looks like a lot of people have used this to treat chronic illnesses as well. So I'll just kill two birds with one stone, and lose a little weight for my wedding and try the paleo diet. And I went ahead, I tried that, and I felt great. I was still on all my medications, but I was using paleo too, so paleo helped a lot of the other residual symptoms that I had go away. My energy level was great. I was lifting weights 3 times a week. I was happy. And then after my husband and I got married, we had the craziest first year of marriage that I would hope that no one has, because we just had crazy life stress. We moved. We were both in graduate school. We had work problems and death in the family, all kinds of stuff. And the stress just really caught up to me, and I ended up being super, super sick for about 6 months. Nothing was working. So going to AIP, honestly, is kind of like what Jamie said. It was more out of a place of desperation, because after being sick for 6 months, I was almost bedridden from pain and from fatigue. And my only options were to go on a biologic medication, which is not something that I was comfortable with, because I always tell people, if a medication has a side effect, I will get it. I always have. So with the biologics, I just wasn't comfortable with the side effects. They had the potential to be fairly severe, and it wasn't anything I was comfortable with. And my only other option was to get my colon removed. And at 22, that wasn't something that I wanted to happen either. And it really just would have impacted the whole rest of my life, not necessarily in the most positive way. So I was just desperate. So I researched it, and then there was just one night where I was like, I can't do this anymore, and I'm going to go AIP tomorrow. And that was what I did. So it was more out of desperation than anything, but it was a long, multiple-year process between diagnosis and finding AIP. So the next question is, what did that transition process look like for you? Oh no, I kind of already answered that. From the point that you got your diagnosis and heard the doctor's recommendations, to the point that you found a balance that worked for you between the doctor and doing your own research and making diet and lifestyle changes.
My transition was pretty slow initially. Obviously, I didn't even know that anything like paleo or AIP, or for that matter, celiac disease existed until my celiac diagnosis. But after my diagnosis, the transition was very fast. I went from trying to do their suggested route of, oh, just don't eat gluten and you'll be fine, and I actually got sicker. And my gluten antibodies actually climbed. And I was like, no, this is not working. And I knew that I was adhering to a gluten-free diet. It wasn't a matter of cross-contamination or, being too risky eating out or not understanding where gluten was. I knew all that stuff. So within 3 months of my diagnosis, I transitioned to AIP and just took off on my own, and 6 weeks later my antibodies were down by half. So I knew that that was definitely the right way to go, and I just went with it full force.
Cool.
So yeah, for me the same kind of story. I didn't, in the start of my illness, didn't know anything about paleo as a modern day kind of diet or AIP or any of that, of course, didn't exist.
Didn't exist.
SCD did though, but I never heard anything about it. I didn't know anything about anybody using diet in relation to inflammatory bowel diseases, Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, and it's sad because clearly it doesn't take a big leap of faith, I think, to think there might be something to it. And so it's too bad that I didn't have doctors suggesting that I try it anyway. The most they ever said was, well, if a food makes you sick, don't eat it. Well, everything made me sick. So I determined that the way I explained that was nothing made me sick because I was sick. It wasn't food. I couldn't see any connection to it. So anyway, the transition for me was not so much, I would say, a transition, but more of an adding in, because I didn't stop any of the conventional treatments that I'd been doing. I stayed kind of on that path. I just added on the idea of using diet. So and when I decided to do that, that was pretty much an overnight thing. Like I decided on, that's it. I'm doing this starting tomorrow, and then my diet evolved from there, but the initial transition was just a decision that I made and jumped right in. And it just so happened that I had a colonoscopy scheduled almost exactly a month later. So I thought that would be interesting to see, what that colonoscopy showed. I didn't have a clear before or after, obviously, because my last one had been quite a bit before that. But it was exciting because what it showed 1 month after going to a grain-free diet was only minimal evidence of resolving Crohn's disease. So it showed healing. That was all that it showed. So, and my anemia started to improve right away as well.
Yay, yay for positive colonoscopies. All right, Tara.
For mine, mine was actually pretty quick because before my diagnosis with lupus, I actually went gluten-free because I thought there was something there, and that was causing a lot of my gut issues. And so I went gluten-free, and then we had I had an upper GI and a colonoscopy scheduled for a month later. So we couldn't do the actual celiac testing because I had already been gluten-free, and I would have had to eat gluten, and I didn't want to do that because it was helping a little bit. So I tried that first. It still wasn't enough, and then I got my diagnosis in November, and by January I had gone paleo already. So that was pretty quick, and then Sarah's book came out, and I said, ooh, you know, this is especially for autoimmune disease, so this must be something that I can really get into. And I ordered her book immediately, read it over 2 days, the entire book, and everything clicked. And it just made sense to me how this would be something that would explain so much that I had gone through years and years before. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, I must have had lupus for a while. And of course, you know, nobody found it. And so it started adhering to the program immediately, and it worked wonders. And within, I think it was about 6 months, I was able to put everything into remission. And, you know, it just proved to me that I could do it without the drugs. I could do it without the medication. I mean, the doctor wanted to put me on anti-malarial drugs, and I just looked, I said, I don't have malaria. What's wrong with you? But now I'm glad that I didn't follow that course of treatment, because I've been able to help things so much. And it's not like I don't have a flare now, here and there, but you know, I do know I made the right choice, because the medications would have simply, you know, alleviated the symptoms, but not necessarily helped to treat it, which is what I felt like I've done with being on the AIP.
Cool. Yeah, like I said, my transition kind of just came from that place of desperation, and at that point, at the point that I started AIP, I had gone off of the immunosuppressant because for whatever reason, it combining with steroids gave me really terrible reactions. I would like break out in hives. I got shingles at one point. So I had gone off the immunosuppressant so that I could go on steroids to try to get that immediate flare under control. So I had gone off of that, and I was just on the mesalamine medication and a short course of prednisone at the time that I started AIP. Within 3 weeks, and I've been on the prednisone for a while once I started AIP I hadn't seen any improvement. And I started AIP, and within 3 weeks, my bleeding had gone away, and I was able to get off of the steroids no problem without any residual flaring or anything like that. And I mean, it took me about 6 months to feel like I was mostly fully recovered from that flare in terms of energy levels and everything else, adrenals from the on and off steroids and everything. but I was able to be in remission. So I still do take the mesalamine medication because I feel like it helps, it supports, and I don't have any problems with it. And with AIP, I've been able to stay in remission for most of that time. I had a little flare around the time that we were moving before Christmas, but I didn't have to go on any steroids, which to me was a big victory because I was able to get the flare under control with just using AIP and listening to my body, and that was really important. So it took a little while. It's not anything that was instantaneous, but it was a positive transition, and with each step, you can see kind of how things are healing and getting better. So cool. So the next one was, how did you go about finding a doctor who would work with you in a respectful way? And this was actually a question that was sent to me by someone who was planning on viewing. So I wanted to be sure to include that.
Well, first of all, I wanted to say to Tara, the anti-malarials must be a theme. For some of you out there, you know that when I got my sickest with celiac disease, my family and I lived in West Africa, and my last misdiagnosis, among many on my road to the celiac diagnosis, was cerebral malaria. And I spent time in an African hospital on IV anti-malarials and then got evacuated to a tropical medicine hospital in Brussels, Belgium, where I had to take more anti-malarial medication. It really did a number on me, so it's a really good thing that you avoided it, Tara.
I think so.
So as far as finding a doctor that would work with me respectfully and somebody that I liked, I mean, I hate to say it, but it is mostly, in my experience, a process of trial and error. I think that is getting better. I think, we have networks like Primal Docs and the Paleo Physicians Network and stuff like that. Like, it's getting better. It's getting easier to find people who get it, that there needs to be a mix between these two approaches, and that diet and lifestyle can make a huge difference. So that's getting better. But for me, it was mostly a process of trial and error. And I also had access to some of the best doctors in our country. I was lucky enough to get to see celiac specialists, GI specialists at Stanford and at Johns Hopkins. And definitely they helped me get answers and pieces of the puzzle. But even at the top medical schools in our country, they don't have it all put together yet. So that was a little bit disappointing in some ways. Sometimes I think when I started this whole process, I thought, well, if I could just get to the best doctors, if I could get to the top guys, all my stuff would be resolved, but that's not necessarily true. One kind of rule of thumb that I have as far as them working with me respectfully is talking about my AI diseases with my doctors. If they start to talk in a way about celiac disease or endometriosis or about my skin condition that I know is pretty uneducated, especially coming from a doctor, the appointment is over. I won't be seeing that doctor. And I've had to end a few relationships with doctors because of that. But if I know more than they do about my disease, that's good. We could have a good conversation. But if they are actually coming from a place of being pretty poorly informed about my disease, then I know it's not going to work. So that's kind of my process.
Yeah, I think the really important thing is to be willing to fire your doctors, and to realize that that's okay. I mean, it's totally fine, and they aren't going to lose any sleep over it, and neither should you. So if you aren't totally happy with the way a doctor is treating you, go ahead and look for somebody else. I mean, I have also, that said, there have been times where I've had to stay with the doctor a little bit longer than I wanted to, just to make sure that I had refills of something or whatever. But, at the same time, I was looking for someone new. And so I think that's the first bit of advice, is that if the doctor you're currently seeing is not treating you respectfully, it's fine to find somebody else. That said, I also understand people might live in areas where there aren't a lot of options. I am fortunate to be in the DC metro area and also to have the ability to travel. I actually talk about Angie talking about seeing the very best doctors. I had my last surgery at the Cleveland Clinic. We drove all the way there so that I could finally have somebody who kind of knew what they were doing put me back together again. But again, I had a very skilled surgeon, which is clearly one of the things that conventional medicine is necessary for. If you need a body part worked on, you need to go to a surgeon. And the better they are, the more experienced they are, the better the outcome's likely to be. So I think that that's really important. And then, I think too that it's important that you know what you want from them, and you know what they are going to be able to provide and what they aren't going to be able to provide. I expected my surgeon to do surgery on me. I didn't expect her to be my nutritional counselor. So I think that's also an important thing in an ongoing relationship with your doctors too, is to realize that you may know more than they do in some areas, but really it's hopefully it's a case of you knowing different things than they know. And as long as they're open-minded to the things that you share and you bring to the table, then I think that you can develop a very good relationship with them. They can provide the things that only they have access to, like prescription pads for medications you determine you really need, and operating rooms and diagnostic tests. For me, I see a hematologist to get iron infusions, because even with the diet, I still need those periodically. That's something that keeps me going. So that's a necessity too. I need to see conventional medicine doctor for that. So I think that there's not an easy answer to this, because the different ways in which you can have relationships with your doctors really are endless. And the bottom line is to just let go of any idea you might have of that old-fashioned relationship where the doctor just knows best and always tells you what to do, because you're not going to find that doctor. I mean, if you do and they really do know everything, you're probably we were probably all misled anyway, because I think the best doctors are the ones that realize the limits of their knowledge. And I think that's why I really like the gastroenterologist I work with now. He is very clear about all the things that he's still learning and that he doesn't know, and I really appreciate that.
Good.
Okay, so I'm still looking for the perfect doctor, but I've actually, like Jamie said, you do make peace with certain things, limitations that your doctor may have. I still see my GP, because if I get a cold or if I get something simple, she's the one I'm going to want to go to for her to take care of that. My rheumatologist I just lost because of my insurance changes in the new year. So now I'm on the hunt for another one of those, which is, not an easy thing to do. But yeah, you have to be willing to fire your doctor if they're not providing you with the care, and if they're not respecting what you want to do also as your plan of action. It's I have my gastroenterologist. She was constantly trying to give me, Metamucil or this or that medication. And, I kept telling her, no, I don't want that. Well, every time I would go, it was the same story. So eventually I did have to fire her and, try to find another doctor that I could work with who would respect my decision not to take medications as much as they would like to prescribe them to me. But I have been on prednisone before. I knew it wouldn't work for me. There's certain things you learn over time that this is not going to work for me. So if you're prescribing this to me, it's not going to work. And you have to have that communication with your doctor, because a lot of times they won't know that unless you tell them. They're just thinking you're being obstinate, like most of them think I'm being, but you're not, and you do have to stand up for yourself. So just because you know, they have treatment options for you doesn't mean you have to take them. And you have to take responsibility for your own health and do your own research as well. Because there may be, you know, there were tons of medicines that I could have picked from, and I looked at each one. You know, I had the doctor give me the list. What do you want to put me on? What is your course of treatment? Okay, I take it home. I study the list. I see what the side effects are. So you do have to take some responsibility for your own health care. And then you go back to them and say, okay, we'll try this, not this, this. If they can't respect that, then you may need to search for another doctor. But, you know, it is true. Some people are in areas where you don't have a lot of options. I happen to be in one of those areas. And you kind of have to make do with what you have. So make sure that you're respected by that doctor at least, and don't do anything that's against your wishes.
Yeah, definitely. I love everything that you guys have said, and I will just reiterate it from my perspective. I mean, I think a lot of it is about your expectations, and I think, like Jamie said, we can't have the expectation of the perfect doctor, or necessarily a doctor that's going to be 100% not only on board and supportive and receptive to you talking about AIP or things outside of their realm of expertise, but also to be knowledgeable about that as well. So we have to understand that the doctors have the information that they were given in medical school, and they have their area of expertise, which I do not have. And then I am an expert in my own health and in my own disease because it's my experiences, and I'm an expert in what I want and what I prefer, and we have to work together to make that function, make the relationship function. So I don't go into my appointments with my doctor expecting for him to be like, oh yeah, how's your autoimmune protocol journey going? Because that doesn't happen. It has never happened, and it never will, because that's not anything that is within his area of expertise or anything that he's necessarily interested in. So my main thing when looking for a doctor is to find someone who's going to treat me respectfully, who's going to understand that I am knowledgeable as well, who, when I say I feel like this is what's going on, or, you know, is going to trust my trust in my body. And that is one thing that I like about my current gastroenterologist is when I'm having a flare, he will say, what do you think triggered your flare? Mm-hmm. And he'll respect my answer to that. And he's perfectly okay. He's not offended by me doing other things. So when I tell him that I'm also working with an acupuncturist, or, you know, that I want to try this other thing, he's open-minded and receptive to me doing that. He's not going to give me any guidance on it, but he is respectful and understands that I have very strict limitations and boundaries on what I'm comfortable with, and he doesn't try to overly push them. He says his piece because that's his job, and then I say, yeah, you know, I'm not going to do that, and that's head in agreement. So, I mean, I think it's about expectations and not going in thinking that you're going to have an experience that you're not necessarily going to have. My other thing that I just find myself telling people over and over and over again, kind of like you guys are saying you can fire your doctors, you're not stuck. Doctors can't force you to do anything in relation to your autoimmune disease. And I have people all the time who are like, I'm scared to go to the doctor because I think they're going to say I have to do X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, your doctor can't tell you that you have to do anything. Mm-hmm. I mean, in any regard, you know, a lot of you know that I'm a birth doula too on the other side, and I get it in that arena too, and people are like, my doctor told me I have to do this. I'm like, it's not your doctor's body. They can't do that. So if you go to the doctor, you can respect yourself and you can respect your wishes and what you want to do, and you can have a conversation with them and take the information and do whatever you want with it. But they can't force you to go on prednisone. They can't force you to have surgery. I mean, they just can't. So you have to look at it as an information gathering research process rather than I'm going to go to this appointment and be stuck because they're going to make me do something, which I think is the way a lot of people feel because we're in a society that really encourages that power differential between doctors and patients, and we feel like we are stuck because they're the authority figure and we're not. And we go in there and they're going to tell us what to do, but you have to respect yourself and do your own research and advocate for yourself, and that's hard and it's exhausting sometimes. I just have been going through a process of doctor's appointments here recently, and I said to my husband, sometimes I wish I could just go in there and have them tell me what to do, because sometimes it's hard to do the research, and it's hard to bring the paper home, and it's hard to figure out, weigh all of your options, and it's stressful to make decisions for yourself sometimes, but you do have to, and it is the most important thing, I think, that you can do in terms of establishing healthy boundaries for yourself and for your doctor.
Can I add something to that, Samantha?
Of course.
You can even, you talk about the doctor can't make you do anything. Mm-hmm. Even in scenarios like in the hospital, you have the right to say no to a treatment, to a medication. And people don't realize that sometimes, like the nurse just comes in, puts something in an IV, but they have to tell you what it is they're doing, and you can say, no, I don't want that. And I think that was something that didn't occur to me until I hit kind of a crisis point in one of my first hospitalization after my first surgery. But it was very empowering when I said, you're giving me this medication, and every time you give it to me, 1 hour after you give it to me, I get a fever. And that can't be coincidence. I don't want you to do that. I don't want to take this medication anymore, at least to see if that goes away. And I was in the ICU. I was very sick, and it was a big deal for me to stand up and do that. But once I did do it, it was like that was a turning point in my recovery because of, I think, the emotional and mental aspect of it too. So, yeah, I mean, Samantha, totally. I think that that's huge, and people need to know that there is almost never a point of no return. I mean, I suppose once you're in the operating room and you're asleep, you can't change your mind anymore. But up until that very moment, you are always the one who gets to decide. And so, take advantage of that. Don't let yourself be railroaded in anything you don't want to do. And then on the other side of it too, it's okay to use those conventional medicines too. I don't want to suggest. I think that's the point of this. We're about finding balance. So. If it's something you don't want to do, don't do it. But also, take the best of all worlds, because that's kind of the blessing that we have here of having this knowledge of how we can use diet, and also living in this time when we do have some treatments. And hopefully our future generations will not have to deal with this stuff, because they'll already know the diet part from birth, maybe. And then if they do end up still having an autoimmune condition at some point, that the treatments will be simpler and more effective. So.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's hard because I will say in my experience, and it's not an experience that I've enjoyed, but when you stand up for yourself, you're not always going to be met with, yeah, totally, we understand. Yep. It's not easy. There is pushback, and I think that's where being educated and doing your own research comes in and is so important. Because there will be pushback. So when I got shingles that I was 110% sure was from the prednisone, and I called the nurse and said, my skin is on fire, and I'm pretty sure it's a side effect from this medication that I just started, 2 days ago. She was like, I'm sure you're probably getting the flu. And I was like, no, I'm pretty sure I'm not, because I've had the flu before, and my skin doesn't feel like it's on fire. So, I mean, there's pushback, and it's annoying, and you can feel disrespected in those moments because people aren't trusting you in your experience, but you have to trust yourself. And I think
even when they're, I think, I'm sorry to interrupt a little bit there, Samantha. I think even if there is pushback, you just have to try to continue to advocate for yourself. You know, this is kind of like a little bit of a funny and unusual story about trying to advocate for yourself, but during my first hospitalization when we were living in Africa, I was evacuated to a neighboring French-speaking country, and the nurses kept coming in and putting medication into my IV, and I didn't know what they were giving me. And I could only speak enough French to kind of just barely understand what they were saying and just barely communicate back. And the nurse came in on the second day to give me, like, I don't know, the 10th round of something into my IV, and I didn't want to take it. I wanted to know what the medication was that they were putting into me. And I told her, no, 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 you can't give me any more medicine. I was telling her in really broken French, like, you have to go get my husband, because I wanted my husband to be able to tell me what the medicine was. I wanted her to explain to him and him to explain to me. And he was eating in another area of the hospital, and I was like, no, no, I have to have my husband here. You have to have my husband. Stop. You can't give me the medicine. And she misunderstood me, and she patted me really gently, and she looked at me, and she said, no, you and we're feminists. We can do what we want. She thought I wanted my husband because I couldn't make decisions on my own. But even then, I stood strong, and I said, no. Okay. This isn't a feminist issue. I don't want to take that medicine without knowing the name.
That's really funny. Yeah, well, and that reminds me, you talking about IVs and the nurse not telling you what was in them. I mean, obviously there's a language barrier issue there, but as Jamie said, they're supposed to tell you everything they are doing to you. And my other refrain in having this conversation with people is, by law in the U.S., you are supposed to, the doctors are supposed to get informed consent on any medical procedure that they do. And for the most part, what that looks like is them being like, I want you to take this medication, and this is what it is. And that's not really informed consent, but we can't change necessarily the way that they're communicating with us. You just have to make sure that you're informed enough to feel comfortable consenting. And sometimes they won't always tell you what they're going to do, because the nurses, if you're in the hospital and the nurses are coming in and they're coming out and they're doing their things, they're supposed to tell you what they're doing, but they may not always do that in the way that you need them to.
Right.
So you have to ask questions, like, constantly. And that gets tiring too, but I mean, the best thing I feel like we can do for ourselves is ask a lot of questions. Because informed consent is going to look different for everyone and what people are comfortable with, but being informed in whatever that looks like for you is really important, because you shouldn't necessarily consent to anything that you're not informed about, just because that kind of can lead to further issues down the road that you could otherwise avoid. So, yeah, well, unless anybody has anything else to add, I think that's all really good, and that's this part of the conversation is the point of the hangout. So I think those are all really good tips. So in what ways do you work with your doctors today, and what does that relationship look like? We kind of have touched on some of that, but maybe if we could give people a little bit more specifics, that might be helpful, whatever you're comfortable with sharing.
At this point, I mostly rely on my doctors for testing. I kind of figure out what I think I might want to look at, or if I think I need something looked at. I mostly rely on my doctors for testing. You know, I'll go to them. I have a gynecologist that I work with for my endometriosis. I have a GI doctor for the celiac, and you know, I have my general practitioner. And if there's something that I'm concerned about, or you know, something that I think might be an issue, I just go to them. And that doesn't mean I always get the tests, but I'll just go and say, you know, hey, I'm worried about this. I'm wondering about this. I want to test this, and I'll see what do they have to say about it. If I really think it's important and they're resisting the testing, then I will figure out a way to get the answers I need. But sometimes they'll say to me, well, you know, I don't think it's important for this reason, or I don't think we need to look at that. We might need to look at this, you know. And I, you know, I'm willing to listen to kind of their educated reason for why it might not be the appropriate test, or I might need a different test, you know. So I kind of rely on them for that, and I really rely on my general practitioner for my annual physical. My annual physical is a really comprehensive physical. She does everything, and it's really important to me. I feel like at this point that is a really important point of the year where I can gather a lot of knowledge about myself and where my kind of baseline is compared to years before, or what are, you know, areas that I need to improve for my health to continue to get better in the future. So I really, you know, that's a really important part of my relationship with my general practitioner. And then, you know, endometriosis, I have stage 4 endometriosis. It's quite severe. It's quite aggressive. It can affect other organs. So I need my gynecologist. He's also a surgeon. I need my gynecologist to help me make decisions about surgery. And I'm not willing to take some of the management medications for endometriosis, so I need to also make good decisions with him about pain management when I'm experiencing pain. So that's kind of what I rely on them for at this point.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I see a hematologist and I get regular iron infusions, and then my gastroenterologist I see regularly as well. Actually, it's interesting, Angie, that you brought up testing, because not too long ago now, earlier this year, I went to my gastroenterologist saying, you know, it's weird. I'm having just some symptoms. I won't get into any details, but and I thought it was just because I'd been on some antibiotics, and so I just needed to repopulate the gut bacteria. And he said, well, what if maybe you have C. diff? Let's test you for C. diff. And I said, no, I've had C. diff before, and I was like, it was like death. You know, I'm sure I don't have it, because really I feel okay. I just, you know, I'm having these bowel issues. And I said, well, I mean, it's no big deal. I can do the test, so I'll do it anyway, and we'll just go ahead and do that. Well, it turned out it was positive. This is one of these crazy balance between conventional and natural medicine. Turned out it was positive. I had C. diff. We did the first course of treatment, which is to do antibiotics, which had worked for me in the past and didn't work this time, and ended up actually doing a fecal transplant that my gastroenterologist, my conventional medicine doctor, administered in a colonoscopy. So pretty neat story, really, about balance, you know, there between the two, and kind of having everything flipped around, in which I think the take-home lesson there is to just keep an open mind with your doctors, even when you think you're pretty sure you know. I didn't know what was wrong, but I was pretty sure that wasn't it. I mean, actually, I wouldn't say pretty sure. I was totally sure. I was shocked when the test result came back. And then sidebar to that, the reason that, you know, when I look back on it, and I think that why I felt so different having C. diff this time around than I did the time before, was that I went into that crisis being in a much healthier state from having such a healthy diet, by having been, you know, paleo and for quite a while before then. So what was the question? Oh, about how our relationship looks. I think that's pretty much answers that.
Okay, so my relationship. I see my GP probably more than anyone, because she is actually the one who even entertained the idea of me having autoimmune disease. So, you know, I see her if I get, you know, lung infection, any little thing are just for test. She'll do pretty much anything that I ask her to do, and you know, she understands me probably best, and she knows I'm going to be obstinate, so she kind of rolls with it. But I don't really see my gastroenterologist anymore. I will if I have a problem, or I'll probably just find a new one, just because I don't like her constant course of treatment, and it's just annoying. So I don't want to have to deal with that anymore. My gynecologist, I just lost a lot of, a lot of you will probably experience losing doctors and so forth with the healthcare changes that have occurred recently. And so I keep my relationships to testing, like Angie, and you know, if I need medication for something. Just recently I had a lung infection. Oh, and I have to get kidney testing a lot, so I'll have that done. I have my GP that's doing that now since I lost my rheumatologist. So, you know, my relationships are okay, but they know what to expect from me, and they know that I'm going to put up a fight, and they know that I'm going to, you know, question everything that they want to do. But they also know that I do respect certain things about them, and they know that, you know, like when I had to have my gallbladder surgery, I respected the surgeon because I knew he knew what he was doing. How do we take out you know, I can't say how to do that. I don't know. So I needed to rely on him. So I know when I need to rely on specific doctors, and I do. And I'm very respectful. You know, even when I'm rolling my eyes, I still am very respectful. So the relationship is one of trust, but they know what to expect from me, and I know what to expect from them.
Yeah. For me, I do not have a general practitioner right now because we've moved around a lot within the last couple of years, and thankfully I haven't really had a lot of problems outside of my ulcerative colitis, colds, things like that. Thanks to AIP and my strengthened immune system. So I have not had any immediate need for that, but it is something that I'm planning on getting set up. So my primary relationship is with my gastroenterologist, and I have been seeing him for a couple of years now. And like I said, he's as good of a balance as I think that I am going to find without doing a lot of this really active searching that I'm not in a place of wanting to do right now. So mostly our relationship is I see him when I feel like either I need testing or I'm having an acute problem. So if I am having a flare, things like that, I'll go and make an appointment with him. A lot of times we don't necessarily accomplish anything in that appointment except for having conversation, because most of the time I want to use him to come up with a game plan. Like if my course A doesn't work, then what are we going to do for plan B or plan C? So he'll help walk me through some of that, and then we go from there. So, and he's very respectful, like I said, of me and my choices, but he will always say his spiel. So I had an appointment with him a couple weeks ago, and he was like, I really want to do a flex sig, and I was like, yeah, that's not going to happen unless I'm really actively sick, because otherwise I don't feel like it's worth doing the prep or going through the process, because it's going to harm all the good things that I'm doing. And he's like, okay, yeah, if you say so, but I'm just saying that's what I want to do. And I'm like, okay, I hear you. And we kind of go from there. So I try to compromise with them and say, I understand where you're coming from. Here's when I would be comfortable doing that, or if I would be comfortable doing that, and I say what I would like. So sometimes it feels a little bit like I'm going in there and telling them what to do, but at the same time, I also know that if I ever reached a point where I wasn't educated, we have a lot of good back and forth, and he's very respectful in having conversations with me and would say, no, I really feel like, we need to do X, Y, and Z, and he would correct me if he felt like I was going down a path that would be harmful. So he's respectful, and we do testing and procedures, and medication if needed. But for the most part, I really am only seeing him about once a year, or if I'm actively sick. And then I also had to go to a more specialized proctologist here recently, and that was a example of having to fire your doctor because that did not go well, and he was not respectful. But I mean, you have to go through the trial and error process, like we said earlier, in order to learn from those experiences. So I'm going to skip ahead here and ask, how do you decide what procedures and medications you are comfortable using and which you're not? What does that decision-making process look like for you?
For me, let's see. So one thing, I don't do repeat tests for things I clearly recognize the symptoms of now. So, for instance, I've dealt with SIBO 3 times. I think the last time, knock on wood, worked, and I'm okay now. But after the first 2 rounds of testing for it, the process of testing is not that fun and comfortable, and it can actually flare the SIBO. So the 3rd time, I just went to my doctor and I said, you and I both know that I know the symptoms of SIBO, and I know I've got it, and you know I've got it, and I'm not going to do another round of testing, and you're going to give me these drugs, and, these antibiotics. And she said, you're right, okay. So I'm not going to go through that kind of crazy process if I recognize stuff. I also don't do things if they're extremely expensive or extremely invasive, and the information we're going to gain from it is not crucial to my health at this point. For instance, in the past, I paid out of pocket twice for the Metametrics GIFX comprehensive profile, which was really valuable. It gave me a lot of really helpful information, but I'm not going to be doing that test all the time in the future because it's a lot of money without insurance coverage, and I know kind of the basis of the information it's going to provide for me now. And then I'm not going to do anything that I think, I'm not going to take any drugs or do any procedure that I think is going to actually complicate issues for me. So for instance, I said earlier that I don't take the medication for managing endometriosis. It's the main drug out there outside of surgery is a drug called Lupron, which is also used in breast cancer. And it has a lot of really severe side effects. And a lot of women have gone through some really unfortunate stuff as a result of taking that drug. And I'm still probably a minimum of a decade away from menopause, and I don't think a decade of taking a drug that has that many severe side effects is worth it to me. So, if I think that the complications of the drug itself are going to make things worse for me, then I'm not going to take it. That's how I make my decisions.
Yeah, definitely.
So I don't think I really have anything to add. I would say probably this exact same thing that Angie said, so I'll just leave it at that, and we'll save a little bit of time rather than me repeating everything she said so eloquently.
Okay.
Yeah, what she said. Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing. It's like you look at the side effects, and if that's not going to work for you, then nope. That's pretty much how I do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I look at the side effects. Like I said before, I'm like one of those people where if there's a 1% or less than 1% chance of getting a side effect, I've always gotten it. So that's really important to me. If there's a side effect that I feel like is not something that I would be able to manage or get over or anything like that, then I don't take the medication. The other big thing for me is just the research that's been done on the medication. That was another thing that was important for me in terms of my decision about the biologics. Because I am so young and was so young when I was diagnosed, these medications, some of them have only been out for 10 years, so there's not a lot of longevity studies surrounding that. And when you're talking about going on a medication that you could potentially be on for the rest of your life, me sometimes looking at that research and knowing that there's really not a lot past 10 years max. And when you're in your 20s and looking at going on a medication for the rest of the foreseeable future, you need a lot more than 10 years worth of information. And sometimes some people feel like they can't avoid that, and that's a decision that I respect. But in terms of me making my decisions, that's another thing that I look at. And then, like Angie said, the invasiveness of it. If, like I said, with the Flexig or with a colonoscopy, I only do those things if I'm actively sick and not seeing a positive trend in getting better. Because otherwise, doing the prep for that and just the invasive nature of it can make things worse. So I don't do colonoscopies or anything like that if I'm not having any symptoms, because there's no point in wiping out all of that gut microflora that I've worked really hard to establish just to see that things are okay. So cool. So let's see. I'm not seeing any viewer questions. So do you guys have any final tips in kind of the best ways to advocate for yourself in medical environments? Because I feel like that's one of the best take-home things for our viewers, and we've talked about it a little bit. But if you have anything to add, let's do that now, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up.
I think the best way you can advocate for yourself in a medical situation is to stay calm. It can be really emotional sometimes, so if you can try not to cry, I think it will go better. You'll seem to come from a position of much more authority about yourself and your decision, and to just be as well informed as possible. You know, I make it my job to be an expert on my diseases, and I think that, you know, when you are that well informed, it encourages your doctor to see you as a partner and work really effectively with you.
And just to piggyback off of that, I would say that if you do end up crying, it's okay. Don't beat yourself up about it. It happens to all of us. And it will not freak out your medical care providers as much as you think it will. Like, you know, they've seen it all. So I would say if you know that you are going to get emotional, probably another take-home tip here from that is to try to have an advocate with you. You know, if you've got a spouse or a family member, somebody who can be there to be your ears, so that if you do get emotional, they hear everything, to be the translator, whether it's literally from one language to another, or to just from sort of a closely involved to slightly less closely involved state. So that's it.
Right. I think you just really you stay informed, and you stay strong, and also understand that they do know things. Doctors do know things, so sometimes they are trying to really give you the best treatment that they know, and you have to be respectful of that. And I think it's in your tone that you speak to them and say, I understand how you feel, and I respect that, and if you could answer more questions for me. And sometimes they'll be more willing to answer your questions and to spend a little more time with you, and that way you can really fully understand, because it's not good also to go into the office and always say no, 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 no. Sometimes they do know what they're talking about, and you have to make sure that the information that you are getting is correct as well, because you can find so much on the internet, that is maybe not correct. And if your doctor can explain to you why this course of treatment may be good for you and it makes sense, then you might want to listen to that. And you may want to change your ideas. Just because you heard, so and so, it didn't work out for them, doesn't mean that it's not going to work out for you. So you have to keep an open mind while at the same time being educated. Make sure you're educated, though. Educated. Not just from, I heard this online, I read this online. Really, I make it a habit to get at least 5 sources on something before I'll actually believe it. So trust but verify always.
Definitely. Yeah, I think my tips would be A, to take notes in your doctor's appointments, which can make people feel uncomfortable, but it is a emotionally charged situation when this is your whole life and you're nervous about going to the doctor and you don't want to be railroaded. And I mean, there can be a lot of anxiety surrounding going to the doctor. And with that comes forgetfulness when you get home. And if you're sitting there and you're just taking notes of what the doctor's saying and what your plans are and what medications, you'll be putting yourself ahead when you get home and you want to do your research or you want to recap rather than being like, what was the name of the medication that he said and what was this? And, that take notes, and it may feel weird because you haven't been in school forever and you haven't taken notes in a really long time, but take notes. And I will definitely say I always recommend what Jamie said, taking someone with you, especially if it's going to be a big appointment. I think we all have little appointments that are just check-ins or testing, things like that, and it's not always as important to have an advocate with you there. But if it's a big appointment where you feel like they're going to be saying, these are your options, pick one. Or you feel like you're going to get a diagnosis or something like that, have someone with you, because they will very likely hear things that you didn't hear, again, because of the emotional situation that you're in and the place that you're coming from. So it's really good to have a separate set of ears, but also just the emotional support and someone to help you process once you leave the doctor's appointment. Research ahead of time and research after. I don't like to be railroaded and I don't like to be caught off guard, and I think one of the biggest things that helps in having those respectful conversations with the doctor is to have your research and your whys of why you want to do this or why you want to do that, and knowing just kind of what your options are ahead of time so that you can have those more detailed conversations with them when you're in the office. And sometimes that can be overwhelming because you feel like you might be putting the cart ahead of the horse and figuring out things that might not pertain to you ahead of time. But if you have the information, then you can really kind of delve in to those conversations with your doctors rather than leaving with more questions than you came in with. And make sure you know how the best way to contact your doctor after you leave, because I have so many people who are like, just like, I don't want to call my doctor, or I can't ever get in touch with my doctor, or things like that. Talk to them about it when you're in the appointment and say, if I have questions, how can I contact you? Because sometimes it might be, call the office, but if they know ahead of time that you might have questions and that you want to talk to them, it's helpful. For a while when I was in that really bad flare, my doctor would call me on his cell phone on his way home from work, and it was a lot easier for me to have those conversations with him than it was to jump through hoops. Or I would just call. If I called and said, I need to ask Dr. Tendler, my doctor, a question, they would send me through the nurse, and I would have to leave a voicemail for the nurse, and half the time she was the one calling me back when I didn't really want to be talking to her. I wanted to be talking to the doctor. So finally I figured out if I just called and said, I need to leave a voicemail for Dr. Tendler, they didn't ask any questions. They just sent me to his voicemail. So figure out, the best way that that's going to work so that you feel like you have that control and that you're not always waiting 3 weeks in between appointments to get any answers, because that can be really frustrating. So, and don't be afraid to take your sources with you. Like Tara was saying, have those sources and know the whys, but you can take them with you. I've taken vitamin D studies, printed out, and given them to my doctor, because he sits there and is like, vitamin D doesn't really have anything to do with your immune condition, and whatever, you can supplement if you want to, but and I'll take the studies, and sometimes he's like, yeah, whatever, this isn't a good study, and sometimes, he'll look at them and shrug his shoulders, but at least he knows that I'm doing my research and that I'm not just looking at random places like Wikipedia or something that don't have as much scientific backing as they are supposed to. So those would be my tips. We just got a question. This one says, if you guys have time, we'll do this real quick. Do you have any advice on how to approach a mainstream doctor about more functional medicine type treatments or prescriptions that they may consider experimental? So kind of having that conversation with your doctor about trying new things that might be outside of their typical wheelhouse.
I think just asking, just asking, respectfully and calmly, and from a position of being well informed about what you're wanting. And just, say, I'm interested in this type of, testing that's a more functional medicine approach. Would you be willing to help me order this test and help me interpret the results? And, experimental treatments, I don't know so much about that, how you would kind of handle that, but I think the same way, basically, same approach.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if you guys have anything to add, but I mean all you can do is ask, and if they say no and it's still something that you really want to do, find
just keep looking until you find the doctor who will do it.
keep looking, and figure out a way to do it. But I mean, all you can never do is ask. So.
Right. Some doctors might actually be interested in that because they do want to learn more, and so they may be willing to look into it. So absolutely ask, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap up. I'm sorry, you guys, we went a little bit over, but I hope that everybody watching got their questions answered and can hopefully see that, we're on this boat of managing and, especially as AIP bloggers, we're not just, walking through fields of wildflowers without any symptoms, all because we're eating liver and bone broth. It's still a process, and some people are able to do it and manage their symptoms, 100% holistically, and that is awesome and something to celebrate. And sometimes we need to, like Jamie said earlier, have the best of both worlds and just recognize that we're blessed to live in a time where we have the research we have about food and that we also have the resources we have in terms of medicine. So just find the balance that works for you, do the research that's important for you, and don't be afraid to speak up for yourself, I think, are the good take-home messages. But we're all in the same boat, and it's definitely a journey. So I appreciate everybody tuning in, and I definitely appreciate our awesome bloggers, Angie from Autoimmune Paleo, Tara from Paleo Cajun Lady, and Jamie from Gutsy By Nature. Definitely go check out their blogs and hear more about their stories, and they've got awesome recipes and just truly awesome resources, all of them, on their blog. So go and check them out, and just keep working on your journey. So we will talk to you all later. Right. Bye.
Thanks for having us, Samantha.
Thanks, Samantha. Good night, everyone.
Bye.